Smooth 98.1.
Get quick access to loans from Page Financials. Page Financials, taking you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Happy holidays. Happy Democracy Day in Nigeria. Welcome to the show. It's called Freshly Pressed 981, a segment of Smith's Breakfast that brings you a detailed analysis of the newspaper stories, newspaper headlines this morning. And to do justice to these stories, I have Mr. C at D Mr. C on social media. Good morning.
Good morning, Valentine. Good morning, Lagos.
Welcome to the show. And a gentleman, Lakunle70, that's his handle. Good morning, Mr. Lakunle. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Val. Good morning, Mr. C.
I'm
Good
looking
morning,
forward to
Lagos.
today's
And
conversation.
happy holidays, everyone.
Ah,
I hope
thank you.
our democracy stays with us forever.
Amen. Right?
Amen.
Why you not saying it? You don't want that? But interesting conversation we're looking forward to today. You can participate by sending messages through WhatsApp 0809-444-0981. You can also send your messages through Twitter with the hashtag FreshlyPressed981. Our Twitter handle is at Smooth981FM. If you go on YouTube, you can watch us live and leave a comment on that platform as well. Just type in the search box Smooth FM Lagos. I'll start with you, Mr. C. The first story talks about the Cow Roots Gazette that the President Muhammad Buhari mentioned in his Democracy Day speech, where he actually indicated that he was going to ask the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice Abubakar Malami to dig up the gazettes of land grazing routes from the First Republic. The governors don't seem to be aware of this, rather aware of the gazette itself, saying that they wait to see it, but they still hold their ground in terms of the ban on open grazing. Your thoughts, please.
Okay, so Valentine, thank you. Last week, the president did inform the nation that he had instructed the Attorney General of the Federation to dig up a gazette which purportedly delineated or identified grazing routes all over the country. Now, since that pronouncement, a few states have come out to say that they are not aware of this so-called gazette. And these states include Ondo, Delta, Cross River, Enugu, Benue, and Akwa Ibom. Now, it's instructive to note that this gazette that the president is referring to is probably a law that was passed by the premier of the northern Nigeria region sometime in the 60s. Now, we need to remember that from 1960 to 66 or thereabouts, we operated a regional system of government. Now, so what that meant was there were laws, each region could pass its own laws. Now, Land Use Act was passed in the 70s, I think it's 1976 if I'm correct. 76, 77. It was passed under General Olusegun Obasanjo when he was the head of state. Now, under the Land Use Act, land in each state is vested in the governor of that state to be held
Correct.
in trust for the citizens of that state, where it's federal land. Now, a regional law cannot apply to regions to are not covered in that region. So to that is mistaken that northern Nigeria law could apply in the south. Well, I do not blame the president because truly speaking, he's not a lawyer. It is the incompetent advice he's receiving from his attorney general. And this is just another recurring episode of incompetent advice.
Can we backtrack to at least examine, or rather, just try to imagine the normal scenario before a president goes ahead to make a televised speech,
Yes.
right? What sort of procedure could go into preparing him for such?
So before a president delivers a speech, he usually has his team research the areas or the topics he wants to speak about. And then if there are any legal issues around what he intends to speak about, he gets the lawyers to look into it and advise him properly. Now, for a sitting attorney general of the Federation not to be aware of the Land Use Act and avert his mind to the provisions of the Land Use Act is shocking. It's disappointing, but again, it shows that the real issues, because if the president is relying on incompetent and wrong advice, then he's going to be continually prone to making wrong statements. And this is where the NBA should come in. Now, the Attorney General is repeatedly showing that there are question marks about his knowledge, his ability, and his competence.
That's assuming that he spoke with the president before he went on,
Well, the president,
on TV.
we have to believe the president of the country is not telling lies.
Mm.
And in any event, I don't see him coming out to say the president's lying.
But what if he's ill-informed?
Who?
The president.
By who? The president has stated who informed him.
Right.
Now, juxtapose this with what Attorney General did last week.
Mm.
A statement, an oral statement by a minister who is unelected cannot be law. The Attorney General then went on public record to say he was going to prosecute people based on the oral pronouncement of an unelected official. Now, if that is not incompetence, I would love to know what incompetence is. Now, the states have rightly said that they're not aware that under the Land Use Act, there's nothing like grazing routes. And I agree with them. Now, we're waiting for this so-called gazette to be produced. I'm not holding my breath because they cannot produce that gazette. Even if they're going to manufacture it, they cannot.
Incompetence. Now, in similar veins, there's been a threat to the Delta State government, not just the governor himself, but specific areas mentioned in this detail, Asaba and Abo. Some of the two focal points, especially Abo being the one area that Okowa is known to come to hail from. Abo, seeing this, the threats that's leveled against him and the people of his state in light of his support for the ban, especially if you recall last month, the southern governors came together to do this ban against open grazing. What are your thoughts on this, Lafayette, and perceived reaction?
Well, let's start from let's just back a little bit to the fact that the pronouncement by the southern governors was made in Asaba. So if there's anywhere where I want to assume the pronouncement should go live or should become effective first, it possibly should be Asaba, because Delta hosted the meeting where that that pronouncement was made. Okay, and here we go again. Threats of attacks. Everybody involved needs to be aware or to be careful and mindful of the fact that when these things happen, what we are trying to solve will be creating another problem. You want to who exactly is this group threatening to attack? The Fulani herders, or the governor, or the people who live in those towns and cities that they have mentioned?
Let me put it in context to answer your question. An unsigned letter containing the threats was pasted at strategic locations in Asaba, including the fence of a church, and the letter was titled Fulani Jihadist Warning, an open message to Delta State, dated June 13. And that was just one.
That's
yesterday.
yesterday. Yep. Well, for this says it's read. This is to inform Delta State that the Fulani of Usman and Fodo leadership shall do everything it can to uphold the legacy of our heritage of open grazing. For we are nomadic people from origination and we shall. So this is the group is actually in quotes external to Delta and are saying if you go ahead with this ban, we will attack the state.
Should security operatives take this seriously, or could it be apportioned to mischief
At
makers?
where we are and from where I'm standing, I don't think anything should be taken for granted. They should take this serious. The police, the security agencies, particularly residents in Delta, should put everything possible out there. Whether this is a hoax or whether it is real, they should find a solution. They should find an end to this, and we should not take it lying because, like I said, eventually, it is the ordinary people who will bear the brunt of whatever happens out of this. And like I said, like I always say, when we keep driving distance underground, these are the kind of things that we get to see.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alakunle, for that. Steve Obiako said, I want to believe that the AGF knows what he's doing. I don't think it's just incompetence. It's arrogance and intoxication of power. He believes he can say, do, or implement anything in the interest of the North, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. He knows what he's doing. That's what Steve thinks. Hugo says, good morning, guys. I want to praise Mr. C, a lawyer, for bravely saying that the AGF is incompetent. I'm just curious to know why my one being told what he wants to hear. Ikena says, Mr. C, I'm always impressed by analysis gazette that is taking weeks to produce. I wonder if there are still important materials to use for the production. Let for a minute say that such a gazette exists and that it's binding. All right. Should our president in 2021 not be thinking of the relevance of such law in this present age? Ike, thank you for that. Adire says the president's herd of cattle are not on the street, so why should others follow suit? In the face of all these gory details and news and threats and counter threats, let's take some good news, some positive. Since even before the a few days after the lockdown, April of 2020, since the first major case was recorded, now there's a report from the NCDC saying that that's Nigeria Center for Disease Control. They posted on their website yesterday morning that 8 new infections increased the total confirmed cases to 167,059 people. But so far, we've recorded the lowest, number of cases yet since then, and also 9 consecutive days of recording no deaths since the whole pandemic started.
Valentine, another good news to celebrate. Like I always say, any bit of news that has some element of good inside, we should celebrate it. I think that NCDC, they've done a great job so far. Here we are, sometime about this time last year, we kept late nights trying to monitor the numbers as NCDC dropped them on their website and on their various social media platform and handles. Looking at their handle right here now, the last time they posted any numbers was 5th of June, and that's 48 total. Lagos had only 16 of the 48 nationwide for 5th of June. And it also had a breakdown of that number. In Nigeria, in the period, only we've recorded 2,117 deaths. And you recall that at the beginning, we were having the deaths in their tens and in their tens. And like they said now, that in the last 9 days, there has been no death. Two things. One, maybe for the purpose that people we now have a better understanding of how to manage the infections. Two, a few number of us are still very careful, are still maintaining the protocols.
I like how you say a few, because a lot of you are not.
Yeah, a few of us are still doing it. You realize that most likely the people who probably would have been infected are that few who maintain those things. The large mass who thinks I can possibly not be infected.
I doubt that. You know why I say I doubt that 100% is because most of the people who are likely to be infected are the ones not wearing face masks, are the ones actually having parties, are the ones going clubbing. And in spite of the lockdown that's still in existence, or rather, partial lockdown in terms of the curfew from midnight to morning,
yeah.
that's been flouted.
Yes,
It's
of
been
course,
flouted.
of course.
People still
Then
go to clubs.
there's something. Then one of my friends alluded to something, said that maybe this virus is actually not meant for Africans.
Nah.
So he said that, and my response was to say, look, but Africans died
Yeah,
of
but
the same thing. So there's something extra in there
yes.
that makes it look like it is virtually non-existent, despite all these things that you have said that exist. But like, I want to allude to science to say that maybe that we have better ways of managing it. And don't forget, even at the beginning, worldwide, they said to us that some of us would have it. The virus will stay its normal, run its normal course in our system. We would not even know we do have it. There might have been some of us like that. The three of us in this room have been vaccinated at least once, at least.
And thousands have taken the second dose.
And thousands have taken the second dose. And don't forget, they also call, there's also this thing they call the herd immunity,
Yes.
which, whether we like it or not, the target in Nigeria is to vaccinate 4 million or 2 million, 2 million people. Whether we like it or not, those 2 million people will herd immune another 2 million somehow. So maybe we're lucky, maybe we have done some things right, maybe a combination of the two. But it's good news that we are where we are. We are not losing people in numbers. People started alluding to India the last time. But guess what? Nothing has happened here.
Talking about India and Brazil and the other countries, really, that's still a threat because there are strains there that we can't cope with.
They just called off hosting the Copa America in Brazil last week because the numbers kept increasing. So
that has to happen.
Yeah. So maybe for us, we're good at something.
Or maybe we're just lucky.
Yes, maybe we're just lucky. Or maybe a combination of the
8
two.
o'clock. Let's take a break. We'll be back. Analysis is very short, please. Taking too long.
Okay.
Any financial you have zero worries when it's time to pay your bills, rent, school fees, vacation. We'll be here making it easy for you.
Visit our website www.pagefinancials.com or call 017007243. Page Financials, taking you far.
Studio time is 12 minutes before 8 o'clock. You're listening to Freshly Pressed 981. It's a segment of Smith's Breakfast that goes into detailed analysis of our newspaper headlines. Mr. C and Lakule are my analysts in the studio. Mr. C, there's this story from this day newspaper. Buhari says that federal government cannot afford funds to revive the educational system. Is this saying anything amiss, anything surprising? But he mentioned some solutions, possible solutions to this issue. Your thoughts?
So very quickly, he was speaking at the convocation ceremony for the University of Nigeria over the weekend, and he repeated the fact that we already know, at least a lot of us who are not pretending, that there's no money to revive anything in this country.
That's
Nigeria
right.
is, let me be charitable this month, we're broke. So the money required to revive education at all levels is simply not there. And a listener might ask why. The fact is, dwindling revenues from crude oil, coupled with low crude oil production, amongst other things, heightened debt repayment, have contributed to the scenario we find ourselves in. And then the integrity is also not helping matters. So he's advised the universities, reach out to your alumni just like the foreign universities do. For example, the Harvard University, right? Each year, they receive a minimum of $1 billion from the alumni
In funding.
at least minimum. Now, $1 billion in Nigeria will transform any university.
No, that's too much to ask for. Would you contribute to your school, to your alma mater?
Yes, I would. Now, unfortunately,
Why?
because it was run. Unfortunately, I didn't school in Nigeria.
When you contribute, is purely emotional. It's purely emotional. Most contribution alumni associations do to
Which
their
is why I
schools.
asked him that question, but then he says he didn't school in Nigeria. So that's a clear he has a different perspective.
Perception.
Thank you.
So beyond that, so the universities in Nigeria need to organize themselves a bit better. Organize your alumni associations a bit better. give them reasons to come back to the school to invest in.
When you give students the reason better than when you're teaching when they're going through the system. If I get quality education, I know that my school impacted in my life beyond just regurgitating details in an old book that has lost its cover over the years. Would I feel the need to contribute back to my school?
I hear you,
Is that what you refer to?
No, I hear you, Valentine. So there are a number of ways to do it. Now, one way is you need to attract foreign students, foreign lecturers every semester.
There has to be something to attract them.
An exchange program. Now, when foreign lecturers come, they come in with new ideas, new practices, new methods. Foreign students come in. There's a cross-pollination of ideas. It will rub off eventually. And when that happens, when they start doing that regularly, two things happen. You can no longer afford to go on strikes because you disrupt that timetable.
Mr. C, that's ideally beautiful. What I'm saying is, with the schools we have and we've had, forget the strikes. Talk about the things that are existing in the school.
Yeah.
The school system, the quality of lecturers, the quality of education they receive, the materials, the tools.
So that's why.
Hold on. I study computer science at University of Port Harcourt. I'm sorry to call out that, and I can't be sorry.
Sure,
I should be proud, right? But I can count how many times I touched a computer. Besides mine.
So we're back to the same situation. Where by the time you have to attract foreign lecturers, foreign students, you have to improve the facilities. They're not coming to downgrade.
Yeah.
So, and apart from alumni, you also need to attract funding from corporate institutions, and you have to give them a reason.
And he talks about grants. It's not far-fetched, is it?
Yeah, but again, grants don't fall from the sky. You have to provide a reason. So it goes back to providing the reasons.
And you have to have research material that
You have,
so
at the end of the day, provide a reason.
I like this conversation. Thank you. I wish I had more time. Cisco Delgado says, why would there be money to fund the educational sector when Nigeria is busy building and funding real projects from here to Cisco? No, that's not the point. I know you're trying to. It doesn't. That does not work. Can you guarantee them safety? Is what Gloria is asking. Safety and in a need education. Thank you so much. It's Pascal and Fortran. Sam from Ikoyi says, good morning, Smooth FM. How are you guys today? Great analysis, gentlemen. With regards to COVID-19, we've been lucky. That's just it. Our healthcare system cannot hold the fort for such waves in Brazil and India. Then please, the Copa America is holding. It says that match was played last night. Cheers. Thanks, Sam, for that message. Sorry?
It's in another country, not in Brazil. Brazil was supposed to be the host.
Yes.
They moved it to
I see you're excited
Argentina.
about that game. Let's look forward to that in Euro 2020. All our conversation at 8:15. Don't forget to join us. Guardian has this story on Telecoms workers planning to start strike tomorrow over anti-labor practices. What do you know about this, especially in light of what is going to start tomorrow, Mr. Sorry, Lavender.
Anyway, the story says that the private telecommunications senior staff station, they mobilized their members on a 3-day warning strike from Tuesday, that's tomorrow, over violation of labor laws and decent condition of employment. It's a private business, and maybe when the details of these violations, which they should have filed with the Ministry of Labor and Employment, when the details come out, maybe working hours, poor remuneration, whatever it is that it may have been, I believe that strike most times don't achieve the aim that you want it to achieve. It disrupts a lot of things. In those 3 days, don't let us forget, many families will lose their source of livelihood for those 3 days. If it goes beyond 3 days, it continues to happen. There's a domino effect of all of these things. We think that strike, everybody now thinks that, okay, once I disagree with another person, the next thing to do is strike. No.
But that's not the major issue here, though.
But
You've
that's
been complaining since.
Yes, I understand that.
There's a particular telecom company, we know this, with the yellow brand. The staff had complained, a while back, and even written to the NCC and the Nigerian Labour Congress, asking for their support in terms of enshrining their labor laws within those systems. And the companies said, well, it works differently here.
So that's where the challenge really is. What is the content of the Nigerian labor law that makes it easy for private organizations to flout them? Do they sign some form of let me, for the lack of immediate thought, some agreements with the Nigerian Labor Ministry to say, when I come to your country to offer a service or to open my business, I will comply 100% with your labor laws. Then what is the punishment in line for doing it? How soon can the ministry do all these things? So it still comes back to what I'm saying. If they made a presentation to the government, right, what is the government doing about it? What is the minister doing about it? Because of course they cannot say they don't know. NCC is the regulatory body. The Nigerian labor law, the Ministry of Labor should also be involved. But my point is, I always look at the end point of it. So when you go on strike, the country will lose some things.
Do you really think that this is a labor regulation that's flattered by the company in this case, or just a mere internal issue? Because it seems so much
it necessarily cannot be internal. If the labor law says, for example, that maximum number of work hours for you a day is 8 hours, and the company gives you 10 hours, they have flouted the labor law. It can never be internal.
Do you really believe that a telecommunications company in Nigeria will flout a labor law and will not be held accountable by the regulatory body?
But that is what it suggests, because they've involved the NCC, they've involved the Nigerian Ministry of Labor and Productivity, they've written letters to those people. So the point I'm making is that somebody in there is taking the agitation for granted. And this is the result of when you take people for granted. And when we get to these results, people at the bottom line of the chain are the ones who bear the brunt all the time. And that's where my concern really, really is.
All right. The Lagos Zonal Chairman of Pengasan, A.M. Apeng, stated that he made a few comments, actually, including the fact that they're going to investigate this case to a conclusive end. He added that the not all has been stated in this case as well, as violating these rules or some of these laws alongside the other companies' names since 2014 and 2015, that they are to put these directives in place, a collective bargaining agreement, they call it, before disengaging the workers.
Well, that's a different story. There are two stories in one.
They combine them, yes.
Yeah, so the other one talks about some dispute with a Nigerian company in the oil and gas space and how they've deliberately and consistently failed to abide by provisions of the Labor Act and DPR guidelines. And they've actually been fined in the past. And they've now summoned them for a meeting to explain why they sacked them. Now, I think ultimately going forward, we need to find some sort of balance. Every company has the right to dispense or disengage any employee if it no longer requires the services of that employee. Now, companies are set up, they're incorporated to make a profit. Now, if the employees are no longer productive and are no longer bringing in the result, why should a company be forced to retain the services of such employees merely because certain provisions of law exist?
And also recall during COVID, a lot of companies had to lay off so many of their staff because they couldn't afford the bills, they couldn't afford to pay salaries anymore. So if you're going to victimize the company and say, oh, you're going to lay us off in the face of apparent realities, right? Things that we are all facing, and then you want to use labor laws or threat of bringing the nation's labor regulatory body against you to sanction you just because I want to keep my job. Is that fair? Where do we find the balance?
It's not fair, and then we need to be careful because the company can decide to fold up. And at that instance, everyone is laid off. The country loses company income tax. You lose pension.
That's right. Very quickly, Mr. C, please touch on this burden of subsidy because it's a huge issue here.
So again, we've been spending according to the NNPC GMD, we've been spending about 120 billion naira monthly on fuel subsidy. Now that figure is debatable, and I dispute that figure because the consumption that they put against that figure doesn't add up. But that's neither here nor there. Now, this is June 24. We've always known the subsidy on petrol and along with electricity has not been sustainable. And in the face of dwindling revenue, we cannot sustain it. The government did take the right step in deregulating that space. That's the oil and gas.
Sector.
Yeah. But for political reasons or socioeconomic reasons, has backed down. Now, the truth of the matter is petrol has risen to about $73 per barrel. Now, it will continue to rise, but there are concerns about increased shale production from the U.S., which might lead to production cuts from OPEC. Now, when production cuts from OPEC come, it affects our ability to produce and what to sell, and it also ultimately affects our drilling revenues. The government needs to bite the bullet now.
But we've been saying this for...
No, they need to bite it now.
And the fact that the PPPRA, that's Petroleum Products Pricing Regulatory Agency, is actually admitting to this now, even when we all been knowing since. It's quite curious. But Rainmaker sent in this message, says, true, we lack the funds to general public education sector in Nigeria, but we're not ready for the conversation that education is actually expensive. We still want to pay 50,000 naira per session, which is about $105. I agree with the analyst, but Val, aside from the point you guys raised, university administration is a total mess. Putting professors to run a university in Nigeria and the world over has proven not to work. The Harvard University you guys mentioned is run by a president who is not necessarily a university don. Lecturers have poor administrators, and same applies to medical institutions as well, hospitals with general medical administrators. Thank you so much for that. We'll take some of these other messages that were left out during Lagos Talks 981 conversation from 9 o'clock. I would especially thank Mr. C at Mr. C on social media, Lakunle at Lakunle70. Thank you. Please let's engage them on this conversation on social media with the hashtag Freshlypressed 981. I'm Valentine.
This is Johnny Drago, and you're listening